emails, not.
Architectural design build. I used to work with Design Associates.
Yeah. Oh yeah. What was his name? Bill. Rich. Bill Rich.
It just blinked. It just blinked.
Jenny Shakespeare.
Oh my God, those are old.
Yeah.
Old friends. Wow, take me back though. Bill Rich. He used to date my wife.
Okay,
Back in the day.
so with that, we are going to begin the February 5th Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting. I would just like to remind everybody to please silence your cell phones. If you need to have conversation, please take it out into the hallway. If you'd like to address the commission, please come up, sit in front of the microphone, and speak, directly into the microphone so that you're picked up with the audio-video system. I want to remind the commissioners of that too, to make sure you're speaking towards the mics. Since I had to watch the last meeting, if you're leaning back at all, it's really hard to hear.
Yes.
Possibly.
Yes.
We're all to blame sometimes, though.
I know I am.
Yeah. So please try and enunciate and speak clearly. So with that, we'll have, we'll open the public meeting, public comment for items not being heard this evening. Is there any public comment? Okay, seeing not, the following items are continued tonight. We have Chuck Rowe Nominee Trust at 25 Quays Road. That's continued until February 19th. Under request for determination, we have Mid-Island Service Limited Partnership at 41 and 43 Sparks Avenue, continued until February 19th. And under certificates of compliance, we have Nantucket Wheelhouse LLC at 13 Massachusetts Avenue, continued until February 19th. So with that, we'll begin our notices of intent. Margaret Zarcone at 16 Cherry Street.
So really quickly, as Paul comes up now,
Yes.
this was good the last time because we were missing a DEP file number.
Okay.
Correct. Thank you. For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors. This was as Jeff had said, this is a notice of intent filing for a shallow in-ground swimming pool for property owned by Margaret Zarcone located on Cherry Street. It is a notice of intent filing without waivers, and we had initially opened the public hearing and continued it due to the fact that we did not have a DEP file number. The site is not in the flood zone, and we are also not subject to NHESP jurisdiction. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, but we do have the file number, and I believe have everything now to close the hearing.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Any questions from the public? All right, seeing not. Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes, we do.
Paul, would you like to close?
Yes, thank you.
All right, is there a motion?
Motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That closes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to Amy M. Ambrecht at 13 Gingy Lane.
Mark here? I saw Mark this morning. He told me he didn't have anything.
He was on the boat at 3 or 4 o'clock.
Yeah, he was leaving.
Yeah, he was leaving. I think he's with Terry.
He is. So we had continued this one last time too for a file number. And that was the only purpose for it. So if you guys want to continue, you can, or if you feel comfortable that the information's complete, closing, you're more than welcome to.
Closing something out.
There's no waivers requested for
Yeah,
it.
so it looks like I'm getting some,
I have no concern.
I don't remember.
yeah,
I just think they should be.
yeah, I kind of agree, or to continue appropriately. So we'll continue this till next meeting,
Sure.
since there's nobody to present it. All right. So then moving on to Nantucket Point of View LLC at 9 Lincoln Avenue.
Brian Madden from LEC Environmental. I'll just All right, Brian Madden from LEC Environmental Consultants, representing the applicant. Before I get into proposed project details, I just want to give an overview of the resource areas on the subject parcel on or off site. And I think that sets the stage for the project that we're proceeding forward with. So there's an isolated vegetated wetland across Jefferson Ave. There's an isolated vegetated wetland on the property abutting to the southeast. That is owned by the applicant, but not part of this application. And there is flood zone, elevation 8. And that flood zone extends across the lower lawn area off Jefferson and hits the slope, kind of the toe of the slope, only a few feet in. And that slope is greater than 10-to-1 and is therefore a coastal bank. The top of the coastal bank is established here at the point where it ceases to be 4-to-1. And that is up in the upper lawn area, and there's a distinct break in the topography out there. Just to bring it into context of the surrounding landscape, as this is a unique setting in the fact that this is a coastal bank. It's a discontinuous and fragmented coastal bank. And I'll just pass around a few GIS maps just to help illustrate this point, because the coastal bank is isolated
There's a good sledding here.
to this project area. So further to the south, we have Cobblestone Hill, and then the property to the south that's been before you. There's a big wetland restoration project going on there. You can see on this map elevation 10. I know there's no parcels on this, but elevation 10 per GIS is clearly established. Everyone can see that. And then there's another contour further east, northeast. That's elevation 8. That's the approximate flood zone elevation. Now, this is just the GIS. It's not entirely accurate, but it gives you a sense of how the landform configures. Again, the flood zone is elevation 8, extends off of Nantucket Harbor and Nantucket Sound, both of which are over 1,000 linear feet off-site. We all know the area, it's low-lying flat. This is the upper reaches of the flood zone that minimally intercept that slope. There is not a coastal bank further to the south of Cobblestone Hill, and the coastal bank dissipates further to the north. So that's, in my opinion, a very unique setting. And it speaks to the significance of the functions and values of the coastal bank. If we're looking at flood control, storm damage prevention, it's somewhat de minimis in its ability to provide those functions, but the project has been designed to ensure the protection of those resource areas in those interests. And as I say that, I'll go into the project description. Now, I'm going to start from top down. At the top of the lawn area, the applicant is proposing to install a 30-inch high retaining wall. It transitions from an 18-inch high retaining wall to a 30-inch high retaining wall. That retaining wall has been specifically designed to avoid encroachment into the coastal bank. I submitted photographs as part of the NOI. And you can see, if you pull that up, and I don't know if you guys went out there on Monday, but you may have some familiarity with the site. There's a steep drop-off in the lawn that goes to the shrub edge. The intent is to install that retaining wall at the top of the slope and revegetate that upper portion of the coastal bank. And again, the flood zone is at the very toe of the coastal bank, but based on the 4-to-1 ratio of slope, it extends all the way to the top of that lawn area. The reason behind the retaining wall is primarily safety driven for the family that owns the property. But at the same time, the retaining wall will not result in an adverse impact on that coastal bank. Revegetation of that lawn area, that's about 1,500 square feet, will help improve site conditions and improve the condition of that slope. Whether or not it functions as storm damage prevention or flood control at that level, it certainly has some wildlife habitat potential. So we're proposing to restore the upper portion of that coastal bank. The vegetated portion of the coastal bank is currently vegetated by a host of invasive species. There's a lot of black locust at the lower portion of the slope. There's one black cherry sapling out there. There's a lot of invasive vines that are choking out that individual, and also a lot of invasive coverage that's limiting species diversity out there. So it's pretty monoculture or limited species diversity. We're proposing to remove the invasive species by hand. The notice goes through some best management practices to ensure the protection of the coastal bank during that process. Everything's, again, got to be done by hand. It's going to be uprooted as feasible, but we don't want to get into slope stability issues. So there likely will be some just flush cutting and some herbicide treatment, cut and wipe approach to the stems, to the cut stems and stumps. We're proposing, as needed, to install biodegradable erosion control blankets to help stabilize the slope. And we submitted a planting plan that creates a pretty diverse mix of native species, ranging from eastern red cedar, black cherry, sweet pepper bush, winterberry, bayberry, beach plum, high bush blueberry, and arrowwood. And we're not proposing any cultivars. So that coastal bank restoration area is 6,200 square feet. We are proposing to relocate the existing set of stairs and boardwalk that are on the southerly portion of the property. Basically going to extend from that retaining wall at the upper slope. The width of the stairs is slightly increasing from 3 to 4 feet. And we've attempted to minimize any landings or redirection. And we provided details on the design of that set of stairs, but it will be elevated, supported on 4x4 posts, concrete sonotubes, extending down to the toe of the coastal bank, and there will be a boardwalk extending to propose cottage and garage in the lower lawn area. The cottage and garage below, it's going to be on slab with the living area above. Has been specifically designed to be 50 feet away from the isolated vegetated wetland to the south, 50 feet away from the vegetated wetlands across Jefferson, and maximize the setback to the toe of the coastal bank, while minimizing the zoning side yard and front yard setbacks being 5 and 10 feet respectively. So it's reduced in size and location to maximize those setbacks. There will be a proposed pervious driveway entry into the garage and a small second-story deck that wraps around. Boardwalks are going to provide access to the structure, and there'll be interior stairs from down below up. There's 581 square feet of proposed new structure in the 50-foot. 127 square feet of that is the retaining wall, and 454 is the garage and cottage. That includes the deck. The deck, the garage, again, is going to be on slab. It's within the flood zone, so it's going to have flood vents. There has been a question about proximity to high groundwater. I've since been out there to take a look at that, and we will submit information on that. I don't have a specific depth of the footing for that slab, but we can provide that to the commission and determine whether or not there's going to be that separation to high groundwater. My feeling is it's going to be not in groundwater, but not maintaining that 2 feet. So depending upon the final foundation design for that slab and depth, I don't think that there's going to be a need to dewater, but if that is the case, we can certainly provide protocols on how that will be established. There'll be a sewer and water connection to the garage cottage, but what's also taking place in the lower lawn areas, there's a significant revegetation effort with a native meadow mix, and we spec'd out those species on the planting plan, and the intent is to maximize restoration of the 25-foot to that southerly IVW and the 25-foot to the toe of the coastal bank. And one of the reasons also to relocate the set of stairs and the boardwalk, currently that boardwalk set of stairs is right up against the isolated wetland. Relocating it takes it outside of the 50-foot to that wetland and allows for complete restoration up against that isolated pocket. We view that lower lawn area totaling 4,800 square feet as providing a long-term net benefit within the flood zone. Again, the significance of the functions and values of the resource area, the coastal bank, are de minimis, but revegetation of that lower lawn area within the flood zone will help retain floodwaters and better absorb and infiltrate floodwaters if and when that ever happens. The structure itself has been designed to protect the interests associated with the flood zone. Again, designed with building code standards, with flood vents, and the structure itself will not adversely affect the potential functions and values of that coastal bank. Again, given the landscape setting and the overall habitat context being a discontinuous and fragmented coastal bank. So revegetation of the lower lawn area, restoration of the coastal bank that's highly infested by invasive species, revegetating the top of the coastal bank that's currently occupied by lawn, we feel will provide a long-term net benefit to the project. And I guess at that point, I've spoken long enough. I'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? All right. So I do have a question.
Yeah.
Given how steep that coastal bank is, I was just wondering if you guys had some sort of like phased plan for the landscaping.
That is something we have talked about. Certainly, we can attack it in a phased manner because we don't want to denude it all and then have an exposed condition. Or I think it's gonna be easier to manage in segments.
Right, and I was just wondering what that would look like because it looks like you're almost replanting the entire thing.
Yeah.
And if you did that all at once, I mean that would
We can
destabilize.
We can
so.
give a concept of what like a phasing.
Okay, like
plan
spring
would-
one is invasives,
Exactly.
fall one is, okay.
Yeah, certainly with vegetation removal, depending upon the level of the herbicide treatment, we typically want to hit that before we start to get into planting.
Right.
But also there's time of year considerations of when we want to do this to, again, protect the stability of that slope.
So I just like a little more detail on
Yep.
that if possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So at the moment, the lawn goes right up to the wetland, the vegetated wetland.
Yeah, right up to the boardwalk, and the boardwalk is right up against the wetland.
So there's only a 50-foot contour mark on the planning, you know, on the drawing for where the native upland seed mix is going to be. Is that? I don't suppose it's really particularly relevant because it sounds as though it's being improved.
You talking to that southerly?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we have the 25 in red.
Right, but not on Julie Jordan's plan here. She has
Oh,
to
okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Put in the 25, I'm curious.
Yep, no, we can certainly add that. But yeah, it does extend up to basically I mean, there's an uneven, there's some lawn retention in and around that structure, and it is somewhat uneven, but it's basically, you know, halfway between the 25 and 50 foot.
So how high will the upland seed mix actually grow? Or will it be mowed as well?
I think you'd be looking at a yearly mow just to retain it and keep the health and function of it. But you know, the grasses will grow up like knee to hip height.
Looks like Mark has a question.
I do. You're requesting a waiver and saying there's no reasonable alternatives.
Yep.
Why couldn't you build on top of the hill and request no waivers?
Don't believe that there's adequate room to site everything, but the proposed project is the structure in the lower lawn area. And it, you know, I know the way the waiver request reads, it's specific to the proposed project, and the intent is to have some usable area down in that lower lawn area. And we've attempted to minimize those impacts, and with respecting the 50 foot to the IVW, ultimately, and we put it outside the 25 to the toe of the coastal bank. You know, with the 400 plus square feet between the 25 and 50 foot, I personally do not feel that will adversely affect that coastal bank, because given the unique set of circumstances it is.
Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question regarding the proposed retaining wall.
Yes.
I'm just struggling to see what the need for that is. I mean, you've mentioned that it's to demarcate the top of the coastal bank, and in the plan, I think it said for safety as well.
Yes.
But I don't personally understand why adding additional structure right at the top of the bank is necessary rather than just like some type of softer demarcation like rocks or fence posts, or I mean there's going to be vegetation planted up to where you're talking about anyways, so I don't really see it as being helpful, and if anything it's going to add weight on top of the coastal bank, compacting the soil and causing additional stressor on that bank. So I personally would like to see that retaining wall removed. I just don't really see the purpose for it.
Yeah, I mean, have you been to the property?
I've driven past it before, yeah.
Okay. I would suggest you go up there and take a look at that. You know, what the thought is, you know, with smaller kids running after balls, and that rolling down, you know, it's very steep, and yeah. And its purpose is just to provide that physical demarcation. The fencing doesn't give you that undercarriage coverage. Basically, the 30-inch lip kind of will retain the upper lawn area, and we're not proposing to do any regrading or substantive like landscaping up there. You know, a fence still, like a split rail, you know, still, it's going to physically demarcate it, but it's still not going to prevent, you know, stuff from getting potentially underneath that. I think we can design that in a manner and give you more detail that it won't adversely affect the stability of that bank. And again, this is a unique slope that by the chance in this one specific property, the flood zone curls back up and hits it, it qualifies as coastal bank. I mean, up and down Lincoln, you know, there's a lot of coastal bank, a lot of retaining walls right up against the bank.
Yeah,
That slope.
I get what you're saying. I just think that if there's going to be mature vegetation planted up into the top of that edge, it's going to be enough of a barrier anyway that adding additional hard structure isn't necessary, and we can get by with something like a fence. That's my own opinion.
I mean, I had some of the same concerns. I was more worried about like dead men and, you know, tearing apart that top of the bank, so.
All right, yeah, I mean, I think we can look at some alternatives here to demonstrate how we can avoid any impacts. You know, whether that may involve shifting it or some sort of hybrid concept. But no, point's taken.
Yeah.
Can we condition it so that the moss is allowed to regrow the stucco? You know, when it's pressure washed?
I also have a question about the proposed stairs in the boardwalk.
Yes.
And just trying to get at the justification of why they're getting wider from what the existing setup is. I mean, I saw the photos. It looks like there's vegetation growing into them, but with pruning or whatever, it seems like a fine distance to me.
Yeah, it's an older set of stairs, and there's vegetation coming from the south that overhangs. There's a big tall cherry tree. It's very shaded and it becomes very slippery. I think the condition overall of those stairs is not the greatest, and that was one of the reasons why for the upgrade. And again, the relocation is primarily driven to maximize the separation off of that coastal bank, off of the vegetated wetland. And so you're not having a set of stairs that's coming down and then like a boardwalk coming across the lawn area. It's just more from top down. And then, you know, that provides, you know, again, it's a smaller segmented area, but from the set of stairs south to Cobblestone Hill, that's your like undisturbed continuous little pocket of bank. I saw that as a benefit to relocate. You know, 3 foot versus 4 foot. 4 foot was preferred by the applicants just for, you know, access, but you know, ultimately, if you want us to pursue something maybe a little bit narrower, I think that could be considered.
Yeah, I like the relocation. I mean, I used to walk that up all the time, so.
It gets very slippery.
It's very slippery.
Yeah.
Sometimes someone would be coming down and you're going up, you couldn't get by.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that this was a better.
Yeah, I have to agree with Joe, because I used to work on this property, and the current stairs are pretty sketchy and slippery.
But is the width fine, or?
They're a little bit
They're
narrow,
narrow.
for sure.
And I think they're a little bit pushed beyond code, but I think that's what they're trying to do is, you know, the platform to turn. I mean, it's a long walk up, so.
Yeah, and the existing set of stairs isn't like stairs and then like a flat segment. It's more of a sloping segment, which adds to the slippery condition of it. The jogs do allow for that landing and that turnaround to have more straight shots, and we've attempted to minimize that.
Any other questions from the commission? Questions from the public?
Stephen Cohen, I represent an abutter who owns several lots, and I'd like to point out that a abutter not only owns 3 lots at the top of Lincoln Circle, but also the abutting 3 lots at the bottom here, and these positions that I'm taking cut against his own interest in developing those lots. So this is not just about you know, what the neighbor's doing, it's about preserving this wetland area. I submitted a 12-point email. I think you've seen it, so I'm not going to read through all the points, but I would like to note that just in general, there's no justification for this wall. I appreciate the safety of children, but I don't think an 18-inch wall does anything for the safety of children except cause them to step on it before they fall down the hill. I say that as a father of a child who would easily do that. Maybe at 15 or at 4, either way. a fence stops people, and you could have a split rail fence with chicken wire or plantings or whatever. Like, safety should be dealt with in lots of other ways besides an intensely engineering structure of a wall with dead men and all kinds of things that are changing the grade at the top of the hill, changing the weight, changing the water flow, you know, all kinds of negatives. The structure at the bottom of the hill is entirely unjustified in every conceivable way because it doesn't meet the standard. There are 50-foot buffers not just thrown from the coastal bank, but thrown from the wetland on the abutting property and thrown from the wetland across the street. And because there is a massive area on the other side of the property, I don't understand why we would continue with this conversation. I'm unfamiliar with the, we really want it over there because it would be great for the owner's use of the land argument working. I would love to use that argument. I haven't had any success with it, and you know, there's plenty of space. And frankly, if there isn't space, it doesn't matter. You don't have to let them do it, right? There's no right to have ultra build out. So I don't think that they're either applying for or meeting the legal standards that they have to down there. And even if they did, I think that it would be highly unfortunate to have a 2 or 3 story, 2.5, 3 story structure at this site where you've got, you know, a nice view of the bank and these wetlands, and interrupting it with a structure that needs waivers is something I think the commission should strongly think against. If they wanted to have a smaller structure that didn't have a 10-foot plate height and then, you know, 2 levels of living space, that might be more acceptable if you determine that there should be anything there. They already have a garage and parking on the other end, so they don't necessarily need 10 feet under this structure to allow for that. They could have, under flood code, a 1-story structure that's only 3 or 4 feet off the ground, you know, whatever the elevation is, and still have something there if you deemed it to be there. So I think that this is really maxed out and unjustified. Whether or not they replace the stairs, I think is somewhat inconsequential, but I also am not sure that they've met the burden on that. So I would urge the commission to collect the information and to assess this under your, you know, regulations and determine whether or not anything should be there, and if it is, whether or not they're over, because they haven't submitted any elevations. They haven't told you how tall this building is, but they've told you it's a garage apartment, so that's at least 2 levels, and under flood zone. What's your first floor elevation?
Flood zone's 8.
8, yeah. So, you know, but if it's a garage, you're talking about something that's probably starting at 9 feet in the air, so you're at least 20 feet tall on your ceiling, and then your ridge is 25, you know, whatever the math is on the building. So you don't need elevations to see that it's a, you know, 25-foot structure if it's an inch. So I look forward to seeing the information that wasn't provided and the waivers that weren't requested come forward to you, and perhaps more information on the structure and more information on the non-delineated wetland across the street, which is only shown as an estimated wetland when it should be a delineated wetland, especially since that impacts whether or not there's a 50-foot buffer here or not. And then also whether or not I'd like the commission to see just are they meeting the legal justification here, despite the fact that there's a large amount of mitigation proposed through this revegetation. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions?
RJ Turcotte, Nantucket Land Council. Just like to second me taking a closer look at the groundwater table in the area. Tend to agree with the comments on there being reasonable alternatives. And lastly, if the project does go forward and the revegetation restoration does happen, there shouldn't be any sort of professional vista pruning or anything like that. It should just be allowed to grow back in and really fill out those areas that they're proposing to revegetate with native vegetation. So those are the comments from the Land Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a response to any of those?
Well, maybe just a question to the board on there has been previously a rough schematic architectural of what tentative structure would look like. That was previously contemplating all the setbacks and minimizing intrusion into the 50-foot and maximizing the 50. We haven't yet done any definitive architectural plans. There's limitations on the height of any structure out here to begin with. It's only about, I think, 24 feet wide, and the width of that lower lawn area, obviously we have about 50 feet of open area to that bank. So it's not like we're compromising a view of the coastal bank, but this is somewhat, in my mind, counterintuitive to a wetlands scenic view question, because we got the ocean to our back and we're looking at something landward. From a public way, I've always dealt with it from looking out towards the water. So I don't know if massing or kind of configuration, height of that structure is important to the commission. I'd pose that question to you all.
Well, opposite there on 7 Jefferson Avenue was quite a substantial
Structure.
building there. I think I'd like to go out and have a look more closely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say that the vegetation that's offsite to the north is roughly about like 20 to 25 feet right now. So anything would be somewhat comparable to that. And certainly lower than the elevation at the top of the coastal bank, which is 36. So it's not like the ridge peak is going to be peeking over that. So.
Yeah, I think I'd be more concerned about mechanicals, drainage, gutters, all that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Groundwaters, elevation, excuse me.
Yeah, we don't show any mechanicals, AC units or anything like that, but my understanding was that it was going to be under the deck because it's a second floor deck, but I can confirm that. And, we're not proposing any sort of drainage given the small size of the structure. I don't necessarily think it's a flat lawn area. We're not proposing to do any grade changes out there. If the commission wants to see some sort of like French drain, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, it might be good just because one of the photos submitted did show like the wetland water across the street, just to kind of assess what potential.
Yep, because everything
issues
coming
this
up
would
top
create.
from Jefferson flows downhill, and then the road pitches to the east side, and that's where it all
So
collects.
do you have preliminary drawings of the garage with the apartment?
Something was designed, but it's it's not reflective of what the ultimate proposed configuration was. I mean, if that's something that the commission would like to see, I think we can.
Yeah, I think we
I think
need to see it coordinated.
I
Okay.
would think so.
All right.
I mean, I don't know if you've gone through the HTC, but
No.
we could have summed a little bit.
Yeah, nothing's been gone through HCC. Certainly, we wanted to go before this board first before taking it, spending the money for the design.
It's not our bailiwick, Madam Chairman, but they may have their hands full with the cottage not being properly clustered on the lot too, which is right in their guidelines. You must cluster if you can.
This is for HDC.
Yeah, for HDC. which is-
Yeah,
again,
so.
I realize. but
Yeah, we
it-
should stay
maybe-
out of that.
Yeah.
Far away.
I nonetheless, scenic views do play a part. And maybe a small part, but we've had an abutter ask us to consider it. So,
Yeah, I am looking at the text of our waiver requirements. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but nothing in the requirement precludes us from asking for analysis of an alternative location on the site. It's not written project as cited. It's just written proposed project. Essentially, the proposed project is a cottage and a garage, and it's well within our rights to ask for an analysis of that on any part of the lot that is is open, essentially.
Yeah, I know that question has come up in the past, and I don't know if staff wants to weigh in, but the interpretation that I've heard is always, specific to the project that you're proposing. I know that that language isn't specific to limiting it to the lot itself or other factors, but considering all that, ultimately, we feel the proposed project won't result in adverse impact on the resource areas, and we feel that everything is being proposed out here is going to be a long-term net benefit. But we can certainly provide more information on everything that's been asked.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission or the public?
Well, if you're gonna continue, if you're gonna continue
Yeah.
wanting your wall, we're gonna have to have a lot more
Right,
info on this.
Okay, yep.
All right, so Brian, yeah.
I did. I'm sorry. We need more information on the wall, please, if you're gonna continue with that.
No side view.
Soft talk.
And a site viewing,
please.
okay, so that'll be the, Tuesday, right?
Oh, yeah, next.
Site viewings, I think will be the 18th.
Yes, it's the Tuesday after.
So hopefully a site
Site
viewing to
view.
this one, and then would you like to continue until February 19th?
Yes, please, yeah. And you said site viewing on the 18th?
18th.
We are closed on the 7th.
Yep. All right. I'll try to make it out for that, but I may not be able to make it. But it's easy accessible.
Yes, it is.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you very much.
And that'll continue until the
Thank you,
19th.
Brian.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, so moving on to Suzanne Keller and Andrew Bennett at 49 Millbrook Road.
All these people.
I know. Andrew Bennett.
Can you imagine that?
Thought we might actually see his face on here.
Yeah, right, he's gotta
we were
put in a notice
So I
to
will
get to
say,
see
I'm
him
not sure
again.
that Andy is eligible to come
Oh, he can't even come here
present
yet?
in front of the commission at this point, because he's still within his cooling off period.
Oh.
I did jokingly say to someone when we write an order, we should throw the condition under that,
Tell them we say hi, please.
that prior to start of construction, Andy has to reapply to be on the commission.
Good evening, David Haynes for the applicant. And what this is a request for, is a notice of intent for a construction of a fairly small addition onto an existing house. The work is in the buffer zone to an off-site isolated wetland, but greater than 50 feet away. There are two other wetlands on the site, or 200 wetlands associated with the project. One is a large bordering vegetated wetland at the rear of the property that's part of the Millbrook swamp system, and another is another very small isolated wetland just off-site on the other side of a previous road that's now, it's a real rabbit's warren in there. But the isolated wetland, it's greater than 50 feet away. It's in an existing lawn area. There is a proposed siltation fence along the limit of work. The foundation, I had stated in the notice of intent, it was going to be slab on grade with footings. I talked to him later. He would really like to do just a crawl space, just footings. So the footings will be at the same height, but instead of a slab, it'll be a crawl space with a regular floor joist. The top of the foundation will be at 24, so down 4 feet. That's down to 20. The measured water level elevation in the test pits for the septic system were down at 12. So we've got more than 4 feet of separation. There's no need for dewatering during construction or long term. No waivers are required. It is outside the natural heritage area. It's in existing lawn and landscaped area. We do not have a file number, so we're going to have to continue anyway. But if you had any questions, I would have them come back next week.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? This one seems pretty straightforward. Any questions from the public? Okay, so would you like to continue until the 19th?
Yes, please.
So this will continue until February 19th. Thank you. So moving on to Claire F. Salvatore at 13 Old Westmore Farm Road.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo, Nantucket Engineering, I'm before you tonight with a notice of intent for proposed work in the buffer zone to an inland bank and a pond. And this is on Old Westmore Farm Road. We have an existing single-family dwelling and residential landscaping. We are proposing to install a swimming pool and a patio outside of the 50-foot buffer zone. There'd be no fence, it would be the auto cover, and we've kept all structural elements outside of the 50-foot buffer zone. No disturbance within the 25-foot buffer zone, just minimal grading. The area, as you can see from the topography shown on the plan, rises up fairly steeply from that pond edge. We have used the pond elevation for our estimated groundwater elevation, and in doing so have maintained the 2-foot separation. So not only are we not in the water, we're the bottom of the excavation. I have pretty much at 2 feet above that pond. So I believe the project as proposed would not have any adverse impact on the interests protected by the commission, and I'd be happy to address questions or concerns. We've included both landscape plans, pool details, the wetland boundary, and we have received a file number.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? There's another minute. Questions from the public? Great. Jeff, do we have everything we need to close on this one?
Yes, you do.
One more time to the commissioners. No questions?
So I assume it's gonna have an automatic cover?
That's correct.
And no lighting?
No, not beyond. I mean, there might be lights in the pool, I presume, but I'm not aware of any landscape lighting, and it's not shown, I don't believe, on the, it wasn't something that they discussed with me.
All right, so if we have everything we need to close and there's no questions,
Move to close?
well, would you like to close our?
Yes, please.
And then we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to Town of Nantucket, 4 California Avenue and Alabama Avenue.
Jen has passed her.
She's passed. She's welcome anytime.
If everybody's settled. All right, just like to talk about this Dune stabilization project a little bit. I just like to
state your name.
I'm Vince Murphy for Natural Resources Department, and talking about the Dune stabilization project in an area adjacent to Millie's Bridge in Nantucket. First of all, I'd like to say thank you and also introduce Jen Carberg, who did the majority and the bulk of the research for this work. Jen probably knows more about this than I do, but and I'm sure everyone is familiar with this site. In October 2017, there was a washover event that put a substantial amount of sand on top of a previous wetland salt marsh area surrounding Millie's Pond. It dumped a lot of sand in that area. This was a natural alteration of this into a coastal dune. So the purpose of this project is to create, to vegetate a portion of this area that the town of Nantucket owns in order to stabilize the area. It's worth noting that this works area is entirely within a resource area and is coastal dune. And the main purpose of this is to stabilize it under performance standard 310 CMR 10.285 section C, and is a planting compatible with natural cover vegetation. So we're also looking for a request waiver for section 2.03B-2, which requires that all non-water dependent projects be at least 25 feet from a resource area. This project will take place entirely within a resource area. The project will provide a long-term net benefit to improve an improvement to the resource area through revegetation using native vegetation intended to enhance the ability of the coastal dune to aid in storm damage prevention, erosion and flood control, prevent land in coastal areas from storm damage, serve to provide wildlife habitat and provide important wetland scenic views. Therefore, this project requires a waiver under section 103F, A and C of the of the Nantucket wetland regulations. The only potential negative part of this project is how long it will be effective for, unfortunately, as the area has the potential to wash over again or be eroded. It is hoped that this will be a remedial effort and only in the medium term. A long-term solution may still have to be sought, and that would be part of a coastal resilience plan that the town is currently researching. We plan on undertaking this planting effort in this spring if this is granted, and the planting effort should take about 1 to 2 days depending on the number of volunteers we get. So at that point, questions. Try and keep it brief.
Yes. Like, if you need volunteers, reach out to the high school.
Yes, and we plan to.
Yes, that's
So
already been mentioned.
This was brought up at the Nantucket Admiralty, which is 300 guys, and they were trying to say, like, how do we do something like this? And I said, something's coming. So once you get close to going, let me know, and I will send out an email to all the members.
Appreciate
they
it.
Would love to help out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like to add the Nantucket Conservation Association has been very much involved with Jan and Vince, and we're planning to bring out a lot of volunteers as well as the coastal erosion group of the Nantucket Conservation Association. It is hard to see any downside to this project, and hopefully it will maintain the dune long enough that it can actually reestablish itself.
Yes.
One of the things I should point out, just as we're presenting the project and as part of what we're planning to do, is as part of my research with the foundation, we have a couple of years of monitoring plots out there, which we're going to continue doing. We had been initially hoping that the wetland vegetation would come back, but that is not the case. But we are hoping to use this project as an example of potential coastal resilience projects as far as this natural dune restoration. There hasn't been a lot of stabilization of this nature on the island, so we are hoping to provide a lot of monitoring, look at the success of the plantings, what the survivability is of the plantings that go in long term, and then how much elevation they're building on that dune as well. So that's information that we'll hopefully provide back as far as potential future projects.
So I just have a question. One, I'm excited to see a restoration, but I know on some of like the previous Conservation Foundation projects, we had discussed sourcing of plants that might be more localized. Is there any hope for this project for local plant sourcing, or are we still like using off-island stuff?
As much as we can, we'll be trying to find local stuff, partly because it also cuts down on shipping costs, but also supports local economy, which is one of the other nice, hopeful goals.
Okay. I think a lot of the beach grass we'll most likely have to get off island for this particular project, although in the future we can look at the potential of gathering seed and growing on island if it ends up being something useful for projects like this. I know Vince had talked to surfing hydrangea as one potential for getting local on the woody species as well. So I think that is part of the plan, is to try and source what we can locally, and then what we can't.
Yeah, they also list other species like groundsel, which is another hopeful species we wanted to put in the ground. They have that kind of stuff usually, so that's the other kind of species we're looking at should be able to be sourced locally as well.
Yeah, and groundsel as well, because I have seeds all in my yard. That's one that you can start propagating fairly easily if you're using it frequently.
Definitely. I think part of it is that, we're hoping to get larger plants in place this year for that stabilization piece. So we can get on island of larger size this year, we will, and then if it looks like we would do additional planting on this or other projects in the future, then we could take the time to do collection and get local germination.
Thank you.
So, sorry. I have just a couple of clarification questions and one technical question. I really appreciate this effort at dune restoration. I'm just wondering, it's identified in NOI and from the vegetation surveys that exist that 2 invasive plants are found in the survey area.
Yes.
In addition to the planting of native species, would you be willing to remove those invasive plants as part of the project and then monitor the success of that removal?
So the invasives that are identified are primarily on a neighboring property.
To the west.
There's the hope that we're working with those landowners as well to see if they can be brought into this project, and would absolutely do management of invasive species on that one.
Yes.
And
correct?
Yes. Oh, that's.
If I may hop in real quickly, Seth, we've conditioned projects like this before that if invasives do come into the project area, that they're removed upon notice to staff or to the commission that they're there, and hey, we're going to remove them because they don't want them in the restoration area. So I think this would be a project where that condition would probably be appropriate.
And then the dune fence that was, or the snow fence that was placed out there, is that on the subject property?
It's on the edge of the works area. We're staying on the bridge side of that.
Okay, and will it be removed?
Currently, there's no plan to.
I think that at this point in time, and perhaps Jeff can speak to the history of that dune fence, it wasn't put in place by the property owners or NCF, but it is building the elevation of the dune system right now, and it's actually almost completely buried, so I'd be worried that pulling it out would destabilize further. So at this point, I wouldn't pull it out, but we don't have any plans to add to.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was placed like without the benefit of a permit, and it obviously is working to hold sand and create a dune, but.
So I think that's something as well. We've conditioned similar situations down in the surf side of Fisherman's Beach area that as that fencing exposes to get it removed, but not to tear it out. I mean, I think there'll be ample opportunity to get a chance at it at some point or another as monitoring is going on.
Yeah, there's going to be several.
And I think, and just to kind of add on, I know Vince touched on it briefly, one of the objectives of a lot of projects like this is obviously as long-term planning efforts are in place to try to add a little time to the clock to put longer-term planning in motion. And I know that's when Jen and Vince kind of came up with the idea that was kind of the initial thought as well, and knowing that there was snow fence there that probably should come out at some point was kind of incorporated as part of the thought process, but once it's not going to do damage to take out.
And then just one technical thing, I don't think it affects the project at all, and maybe it just needs to be in findings for the order of conditions, but it's stated that this is entirely coastal dune, but it seems to me like it would be in the coastal beach, or actually it's a barrier beach too, so I don't know if we need to find that this is actually that resource area as well.
I think that in our application we had asked to not have the resource areas even identified or delineated, so I think that would fall under the idea that this is a transitional resource area, so the commission chooses not to selectively define it as specifically one or the other would be fine with that.
Will you survey this just to kind of see how it progresses or stays? Just kind of.
So as part of the sideline work that I've been doing on this area, we have been tracking and using GPS units to document the extent of the sand and how that has been migrating over the past couple of years, and so we'll continue doing that as part of this project, and then as part of the planting project, we'll monitor where we plant, how those plants expand or contract over time as well, so we can keep track of if it begins to evolve naturally itself into more of a dune system as
Yeah,
well.
I mean,
That's
I think it'd be
something we
great
can
if the
track.
town like did a LiDAR and did.
Oh, that'd be great.
I mean, just seriously, like that's,
Yeah.
it's under a lot of stress out there, so
It
I
is.
think to, you know, get some more information, find out what's going on.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Well, I have several, just, I'm more curious than anything else. When you say 50% beach grass and 50% scrub species, what
Yeah.
is a scrub species?
Shrub species, just bare root shrubs.
I can't hear,
What,
sorry.
Vince, what'd you say?
Bare root shrubs, things that are native to the area. Gone right out of my head.
Try to pull it up just in case.
Thank you.
Well, it
But
does
we're
say scrub.
yeah,
A
so
scrub?
we're looking at
Scrub shrub.
Yeah.
smaller
Small
variety
small
species,
shrub.
right? Particularly bayberry, high tide bush would be the ones that we would pull in most, and then potentially some even native flowering plants.
So
that we
they're
could
the
get our
ones that are
hands
gonna
on.
be 8 to 10 feet apart as opposed to 12 inches apart?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I know we've got, the design in the diagram shows very specific spacing, and we, wanna follow the spacing for the size of the plants, but we're also hoping to do it not in a grid planting, so that we get more of
non-linear.
a naturalized community developing as hopefully as naturally as it would on its own.
And there's no way to use fertilizer that basically promotes growth without being washed into the aquifer?
And I don't
How
think
about little
that we'll
pipettes
need
of
it.
clover excrement?
Well, there's a neighbouring site where we did another planting project, and that went in the ground about May or April or so of last year. And in the course of last summer, that grew in and around 8 to 10 inches higher, and then it caught another 6 inches of sand on top of that just by knocking windblown sand out of the air. It's right at the end of Nantucket Road and in the corner of Ames, and it's only a small little site. It was only a couple of hundred square feet, but it proved incredibly effective at catching and building the sand. So that's kind of the same effect we're trying to get here.
Was that part of the Franzuto site where you came in and had the sacrificial sand? And you have like 4 sites. You had one in Nantucket, Cisco.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that project, sorry, since I was the one that was working for the town then.
Sorry.
That was the project that involved the removement of the pavement at the end of Nantucket Road where it had extended.
Yep.
And that pavement was removed, some nourishment material was placed to fill in some of the gullies that had happened from runoff off the pavement. And then after that had been torn up, some clean sand was brought in because the compacted sand was a little tough to do. And then it was then planted a little after that with the beach grass and efforts to try to recreate a more natural feel and provide a softer end to the road than what had previously been there. But that was one. Hunted Pond Road was the other.
Cisco.
Was the other one in there. The third project that we've seen some of was also out on Quays Road and Bassett Road, that little public parking lot there next to the application that was completed for tonight on the Chuckers, that little public parking lot there. Those are the 3 Dave Franzuto coastal resiliency projects.
Just to finish the end of Ian's question, beach grass grows so incredibly quickly, I don't know if there's necessarily a need for fertilizer, which is also a benefit.
Yeah, I think given the other species as well, you're talking about very hardy, salt-tolerant shrubs here. You're not going to need fertilizer.
Yeah, I think Wilkinson told us that the beach grass grows an inch a day, the roots. They're unbelievable.
It's
So,
impressive.
yeah.
And all of these species are adapted to being in places where they're not getting a lot of nutrient. So hoping that we won't need the fertilizer in order to have success. But again, we'll also be tracking the mortality or survivability of the plants we're putting out so we can get those numbers as well.
Well, I have been successful. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Any other questions from the commission?
No, thank you for doing this.
I'll open it up. Questions from the public?
Thanks, Vince. Sam Kefferstan, Mass Audubon. Just wanted to voice our support for the project as an abutter. Believe the services rendered will reduce chances of further overwash, protect essential infrastructure being Millie's Bridge, and provide valuable information to future coastal resiliency projects. and that as an abutter, we intend to contribute to this greater resilience effort through a similar planting regime under a separate NOI at a later date. So thank you.
No, that's good to hear.
Oh, Sam.
Sam. So you've taken Ian's.
The new Ernie. Yeah.
You're the young version of Ernie.
Yep, that's me. But thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Great.
He's
All right.
same beard, more hair.
Thank you.
Looks like we have another question from the public.
Thank you. Burton Balkine. I had questions about the former saltwater marsh that was there. Does this mean that we're going to give up on the marsh by building the dune in front of it?
Talk to the marsh expert.
So my hope with the monitoring work that we were doing was that I would actually be able to see the salt marsh recover and grow up through the sand that was deposited. But we found, and we've submitted some of these reports to the town, and they're on the Conservation Foundation website as well. We found that the sand that was deposited was too deep at the time that it was put down, that the salt marsh, for the most part, hasn't been able to regenerate through it. And so without significant removal of sediment, we won't be able to get the salt marsh back. And even if you removed the sediment closest to where the pond currently is, you'd get that sediment, the sand that is farther up on the dune that's forming, just washing right down without any support in it. So at this time in the area that we're proposing, that's where we're going to stabilize the dune. There may be the potential in the future to look at some abutting properties that had less sand deposited on them, so to see if we could get some salt marsh restoration down there. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the public? I have comments.
You live there.
The owner of the salt marsh.
My name is Annie Menz, and I'm an abutter. I live next to the bridge, and I just want to say thank you to the town of Nantucket for taking on this project. It's pretty devastating to me. I don't have a marsh anymore. I don't have a pier. Everything's covered. It's like a sand pit out there. I wish it could be dredged because it's really filling in. You can see it over the last couple of years. That little pond that I have left is really hardly any water at all in it when the tide's out. And I'm so glad that Nantucket's finally being recognized as having a big issue, because we have one. And I support whatever you folks will do, but please pass this, will you? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annie.
Any other questions or comments from the public? Questions from the commission? So it looks like we don't have a file number.
We do not have a file number, so we are not able to close.
All right, so would you like to continue for 2 weeks? February 19th? Okay, so this will continue until February 19th.
So if it's already there, so we can, I'll admit, I drafted an order for it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's mine.
Oh, that's yours.
Thank you.
That's an older one.
That's yours. You don't want that.
Okay, so moving on to certificate of compliance.
Before we jump to certificate of
determination.
That's continued.
Before we skip to any of those, we did have an error on the agenda that I just want to make note of before we left the public hearing session. We did check the minutes. We had mistakenly put the 13 Gingy Lane into the notice of intent. We did close that hearing last time. So we'll take it up under orders. But,
Okay, but it's closed.
But it is closed.
Okay.
I just, before we left public hearings, I wanted to clarify that.
So Mark was right, he didn't need to be
Correct.
here.
We double checked minutes and all those things. That was our clerical error.
Okay. Everybody got that?
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so then we're gonna move into certificate of compliance. We have Loman, Great Point.
That's not plugged in. Underneath. Handy.
Where's the foot?
Art Gasparo for the applicant. This was pretty interesting project that I was happy to be involved with for the replacement of essentially some cesspools that were serving the cottages out at Great Point. with Title V compliant systems. And the work was completed. You know, I was out there a few different times, I think in substantial compliance with the order, and the area has been replanted with beach grass. One of the cesspools had been, I think it was probably a 55-gallon drum, and that was removed and taken off the beach, or out of the dune. And again, they had used plastic tanks and did the work in a very short time frame. They put a lot of resources to getting the job done, knowing that it's quite unusual to sort of do something like this. And I think it was a successful project. So I'm hopeful that you'll issue a certificate of compliance.
Thank you.
We would agree, and the Board of Health has already agreed, so.
Yeah, I included the certificates of compliance from the Board of Health as well.
We recommend that these certificates be issued.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
The only bad part is now Mark doesn't have to go out to Great Points to get food right now.
He'll find another reason.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
All of the field work got done during Christmas season.
All right, so moving on to orders of conditions. Thank you. We're gonna start with Great State Properties LLC at 92 Washington Street Extension.
So this was the project that we closed a couple of weeks last time. This was the project that we had seen before on the Washington Street Extension where they were kind of shuffling some buildings around. And this was the project where they're going to be removing and replacing the existing main structure with the new flood zone compliant structure and leaving the front structures where they are.
This is Arthur Reed.
Yes, this was Leo. And Arthur Reed.
Yeah.
So I only put our normal flood zone stuff in there. That was kind of all I could come up with.
Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Moving on to 53 Westchester Street, LLC at 53 Westchester Street.
This is one we also closed last time. This was the project that we heard twice before, that involved the kind of redo. The first week was the one where there was the little, just reminded the little granite curbing around the lawn area, and then redoing the buffer zones and doing some invasive species management. And then the revision remove those components for what was there. So I included our invasive material that's there, some photo monitoring, and then some regrowth and cultivation. So you guys read it.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. So moving on to Margaret Zarcone at 16 Cherry Street.
This is one we closed tonight. This is Los Santos' project. This was for on Cherry Street that didn't require any waivers. So again, it's just kind of our standard pool conditions. Move to approve this draft.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And then we'll move on to Amy M. Ambrecht at 13 Gingy Lane.
This is the one that we closed last time.
Yep.
So just one correction already is the date hearing close will be the 1/22 hearing.
Because today's February 5th.
Yes. Yeah, that's weird. it up again. This was the only part that seemed as the buildings themselves are mostly outside of the 100. They kind of cross over. There's a part of the pool inside the 50, so I include, not inside the 50, inside the 100. So I include our standard conditions again. Other than that.
So what would a waivers and not?
Yep, no waivers. I think everyone has gotten the message pretty clear that waivers for groundwater removal is not happening anymore. So people are getting smart and responding. So credit for credit due to the guy that did the filings that
They figured it out.
Motion to issue is amended.
Is there a second?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. So we didn't close this one.
we didn't close Keller and Bennett. We did close 13 Old West Mill.
Yes, so, moving on to Claire Salvatore at 13 Old Westmore Farm Road.
So I'll add in the file number that 3275 in those spots. And again, this was just for a pool with no waivers. Again, when I actually on this one for the order, I really appreciate that. This is really the first one where we've gotten a really clear cut sheet on the pools too.
Yeah.
It was very helpful in reviewing the fund. So thanks, Art.
So is there a motion to approve as amended? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And the town. Yes. Okay, so then moving on to extension of orders of conditions, Lower Pocomo Nominee Trust at 88 Pocomo Road. It's a reissue?
Yes, this is a reissue. It came back to us, there had been a typo on the front, and unfortunately on extensions, you guys signed the page with everything on there. We had the wrong date got put in, so it was asking for the correct date in those. The order to be extended until July 2020 this year.
So do we need a motion to reissue?
Yes.
Is there a motion to
Motion to
reissue?
reissue.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to approval of minutes for January 22nd, 2020. Any thoughts on the minutes?
They look great.
Thank you, Terry.
Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to accept.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Monitoring report.
None this week until we get to the next section.
Fun. Okay. The next section is discussion of SE 48 28 24, which is the SBPF project for those who are not aware. Discussion of daily logs, Shoreline 2020 contract, 80th survey report for 2019, aerial survey methods, sand analysis update, amendment to enforcement order to include condition number 28, which I thought you guys did that last time.
No, I'll get to that one last. So just to run through really quickly for everybody, and then we'll get to the other ones. Just wanted to make sure, this could have gone into the monitoring reports, that we had posted and continue to post the daily logs as they come in for people to review. But we also did receive the 2020 contract for the shoreline monitoring. We didn't see that as had been requested. And then the 80th survey report had also come in, so we posted that as well. So those are up for your review. Obviously, if you guys have any questions about those or comments, it's helpful if you can shoot them to me first, then I can pass them along and we can set up a time for everyone to be here to go through those or review those questions or concerns as they come up. So just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that those were up and they're publicly available and everyone has access to go through the regular Baxter Road informational portal, the largest web page on the town at this point. So that's all there. And then a sand analysis update. We're still waiting for the results from the testing to come back. This is when they are estimating those to be returned and then to provide us a report back. So I think we're expecting those any day. With that, I know one of the pieces we'd also been looking at is actual conditions of the geotube, since we kind of disallowed work or material. About 2/3 of the lower tube that sits on the beach is exposed in varying degrees at this point. So it's, I think we all knew that was going to be happening. But one of these update that, by rough estimate from my inspection, and I was happy to see that Spruce also said 2/3 today, because I was saying a little over half. So 2/3 is probably pretty close for what's exposed.
I'm sorry, I missed just the last part of what you said. It's so we've noticed that this is that excuse me, that portion is exposed a great deal of the time. So what was the end of that?
No, I was just saying that it's about 2/3 is probably a pretty accurate depiction of what that is on front, but I think we've all expected that to go on, as they've not been allowed to put material until the material issue that was placed is resolved and testing is back, and they can resume maintenance as normal with proper clean fill once that's all been addressed.
Okay, good.
So,
I just didn't hear that last
So-
part.
moving through that, so
just one thing in relation to that, I think this is the third time I've requested it, but we've asked the SBPF to provide us a weekly photo of the condition of the geotube, showing how much is exposed apart from the daily logs, and still haven't seen any of those photos.
I feel like we posted some photos of the.
Yeah,
do you
I
mean
think he
more
thinks
than
they're
what
in
we get
conjunction
on
with the daily
the
logs.
daily
He
logs?
did post photos
Yeah.
that show the condition of the front.
Okay, well, again, we'll make sure that gets addressed.
Yeah, there are photos in the daily logs, but we've asked for them to be separate.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
The office done those.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the other two things on that we can take on everyone, there's the Seth wanted to discuss the aerial survey methods, and then have a report back from the town council in regards to condition 28 from the NIST spring 2019 failure criteria for the monitoring reports. So we can do those in whatever order you guys want to.
Let's maybe go. I was going to say Seth first.
Oh, go
and
ahead.
then the
Yeah,
amendment,
you
but-
ready?
Yeah, sure. I'm
Seth's
ready. All right, so I'll start off this discussion, and happy to answer any questions or clarifications from the commission or the public. So I'll just give an overview of the aerial surveys that have been conducted by SBPF and their contractors that we know of. So the surveys start in 2013. That's prior to the geotube installation. There isn't a document discussing that survey, but it is assumed that it was done by a manned aircraft. I will look to the SBPF if they, if they did it by drone, they did it by drone. But given the year, it's highly likely that it happened by a manned aircraft. And all I know of that survey is it happened in July of 2013. And then moving on, there are surveys by the applicant in 2016, 2017, 2018, and most recently in 2019. And they've provided survey reports for each of those surveys, except the 2016 survey is mostly just contained within the 2017 survey. It's my understanding that the 2017, 2018, and 2019 surveys have all been conducted by Airshark. That's their provider. In 2016, it seems like it was done by someone else. And the report from 2017 that was provided by SBPF indicates that that 2016 survey was flawed. They say in the survey or in the report that any quantities previously calculated from the 2016 data are considered less accurate, and SPPF will not utilize these quantities in any further reporting. And they say they're considered estimates. So essentially we have 3 surveys to go off of: the 2017 survey, the 2018 survey, and the 2019 survey. And the methods of those surveys are similar but different in some ways. In 2017, they surveyed the bluff using 2 different well-known unmanned aircraft system monitoring techniques. The first was aerial photogrammetry, which for anyone who isn't interested or isn't aware of what that is, essentially you fly a drone over the length of the bluff and you take photos with an RGB camera, just like a regular camera, and then after you survey all the area, you bring that into orthomosaic stitching software to create a 3D geotiff georeferenced map, essentially, that is essentially the same thing as you would get in Google Maps. You get a map. And then
It's three-dimensional?
No, it's 2-dimensional, but that technique can be used to create 3-dimensional models. But what they did was they took all what's called nadir images, which is staring face down, to create a 2D orthomosaic. But if you tilt your camera on the drone to face at oblique angles, you could create a 3D model, but that was not done. They also took a LiDAR survey, which is light detection and ranging. It's a different type of sensor. It essentially shoots a laser and waits for that laser to hit a surface, and then that bounces back up and is captured by a sensor to estimate, to really know how far away from the sensor the ground is. So they did both of those things in 2017. And in 2017, in my opinion, is overall the best survey that we have from the data set. There's a few things wrong with it. One of the things that is an issue in comparing it to the traditional ground-based monitoring is they only surveyed out to the 0 mean low water mark rather than the -5. So there's an issue there. But and in the actual report, they lack a lot of technical info on the accuracy, the pixel resolution that they were calculating at, the type of drone that they were using, things that I could probably get from the provider if I inquired, but are not really in the report. And then in 2018, just for reference, so the 2013 survey happened in July. 2016, I don't know what month it happened in. 2017 survey happened in August. 2018 happened in May, which is potentially an issue that I'll get into in a second. And in 2018, they decided to only use LiDAR, not photogrammetry, for the reasons I'll explain in a bit. They have better technical information in the report about what aircraft they use, what their root mean square error is, what their pixel resolution is. They have all that information. But there is a huge problem with the 2018 survey in that they don't actually calculate the change in the bluff volume above the geotubes. They only calculate the area unprotected on the side of the geotubes. And so this is the survey from 2018. This is where the geotubes are. We don't get any data in the geotube area, just in the outside area, versus 2017. I'll show you from 2019. We have the area outside and within the geotubes. And the reason for this is a technical reason based on the type of data they collected in 2017 versus the data they collected in 2018. And what happened is that when you take LiDAR, when you use LiDAR as a sensing technique, you get something called a bare earth model. It basically looks through the vegetation and calculates the actual elevation model on the ground, versus photogrammetry is not able to do that, and it includes the heights of any vegetation that would be in the area. So the information they have from 2017 and 2018 unfortunately are not directly comparable to each other, because they took the data in two different sensing techniques, which is fine, but it causes us in 2018 really not to have any information about the change in the volume above the geotubes, which I think, given what this project is kind of an essential component of doing the aerial survey.
Seth, can I just
said they use LiDAR in both 17 and 18.
Yeah, but for some reason the data they had with the LiDAR wasn't beneficial. It wasn't a good enough resolution or whatever. The survey results that they actually reported in 2017 are based on the photogrammetry that they took.
So Seth.
Yes.
I think part of the issue is probably we're not drone people. So when they were told they needed surveys, we can't recognize those differences. So I guess where should we be asking them, or how should we be asking them to survey in the future, so that it's consistent and, you know, somebody who knows the language of drones.
Yeah, I thought they were doing LiDAR every time.
Right, I kind of thought they were doing LiDAR every time.
Sure.
I keep saying they've done LiDAR, but not.
No, but I felt like every, yeah.
You thought they was apples.
They based their 2016 survey definitely didn't have any LiDAR. Their 2017 survey had both, but the LiDAR wasn't used, I guess, because if it was used, they could have compared.
So they didn't use it in the report, you
In the
mean? But
report,
they might
yeah.
have they might have that data somewhere.
They might have it, but in the report it wasn't used. It might exist in the database by AirShark. And then in 2019, they did essentially a good survey that now we get the comparison between 2018 and 2019 above the bluff, so that we can see what's changed.
Do we get to see NSCAR too?
No, not really. The areas this area at the bottom here is where they actually dumped the sand, and they didn't include that in their model because they claimed that because it's an active site where the mitigation sand is being dumped over, the volume of there is highly variable and it's not going to represent.
We saw NSCAR in March of 2019.
Yeah. So I understand.
They'd have to be surveying right after a storm to catch that, though.
Maybe in future that's what we should be asking. In other words, it's sort of being covered up, I would say, the amount of NSCAR that took place.
So I do understand why they didn't include those ends, but because it's a variable environment, but it would be nice to know. But there is an issue with the 2019 survey that's come out later. It came out in the 2019 annual report, and it came out that their data had a 1 meter datum shift error, which is definitely problematic. They have said that they have gone back and reconciled the database, and that in the 2019 report they used the appropriate data with the reconfigured datum, but we probably need to get a new 2019 aerial survey report referencing that information, because this report isn't necessarily valid anymore.
So has it been any use at all?
So yeah, I'm gonna get to that. We basically have three surveys because the 2016 isn't really helpful. The 2018 survey doesn't tell us much, so we basically have one comparison point between 2017 and 2019, assuming that the data from 2019 actually has been reconciled and they fixed the datum and have everything fixed. We have, of the 4 surveys, we basically have 2 years of data to compare at this point, which isn't great.
Where the geotubes are, though, in part. With the geotube area, you had like accurate surveys of the geotubes, the grade elevations, the.
Blackwell and Associates did the as-built of the geotubes when they were installed.
But
And that was filed with the commission.
But you've been doing some no surveying as they go on. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, what my overall analysis here is that we basically don't have a lot of helpful information from these surveys. We really only have 2017 and 2019 to compare, which is better than nothing. I do understand that this is a highly evolving field, being involved in it, you know, especially using LiDAR for natural environments is a relatively new technique. LiDAR was actually developed for the built environment, like surveying building height and things like that. But, and I know that AirShark as a provider in general has a pretty good track record, but I think that there are some significant issues with the aerial data that we've been provided. I also think that the timing of the surveys is a huge issue. We should be requiring annual surveys to happen in the same month every year. There are issues associated with the mitigation, but there's also issues with environmental factors, like the climate and weather associated with taking the surveys, that taking surveys at different times of the year potentially leads to vastly different results. So yeah, I have those concerns, and then I have one concern that sort of wraps into the 2020 Shoreline Contract as well. We can discuss it then, but they sort of, in the 2020 contract, they're trying to do 3 ground-based surveys and 1 aerial survey, and it's my understanding that the aerial survey has to be separate from the ground-based surveys and can't be taken in place of that, but we can talk more about that then. So I think that hopefully, you know, moving forward, we continue to get all the surveys done in the same month with the same technology, which is LiDAR, hopefully. 2018 and 2019, they used the same provider with the same drone, the same sensor, so that's all good. In 2018 and 2019, they started in the reports to describe a lot more of the technical data, like what their pixel resolution and their sensors and everything were. So that's a step in the positive side, but this isn't ideal data.
Yeah, so I think, again, like for moving forward, there's not a lot we can do to correct those unfortunate surveys, but having a list maybe from you as the expert on the commission, like we want to see X, Y, and Z out of these aerial surveys.
Okay.
And if you have scientific reasons, you know, or paper to back that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think the data stacked together so we can kind of see what we've missed or where we started and where we're at now.
Right.
Yeah, I'm happy
You
to
could ask them to do a separate summary of just the aerial work. And exactly the methods used and the data side by side and any adjustments or corrections that they had to make, and make that very clear and just focus on the aerial survey itself.
Yeah. And maybe they could bring one of their representatives down from that company to describe what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide that.
No, the Woods Hole Group is still doing the quarterly ground-based surveys as well. That goes with this too.
So that's
you just asked if he had done it.
So I will just say some of the issues I raised were also raised in this document by our independent reviewer, Greg Berman, in 2018, in terms of the independent review of the 2018 SBPF report. So we can go back and look to that document for guidance as well. I think a lot of the things that were brought up continue to be relevant that he said in that document. So I can provide a list of essentially what we would need in the future to have surveys be better.
If you could provide that back to me, I'll put together the request to them. If it's all right with the commission, I'll float that back to Seth to make sure I have it all listed correctly. And we'll just send it to them and say, this is what we need, what can you provide it by.
And Seth, given your questions, which are, I mean, thank God we have you. I mean, this is really useful to have your expertise. But these reports that they put in are part of what, you know, the DEP and everything else is, you know, looks at in terms of, has a walkable beach been maintained, and, you know, looking at the data, and if it's all very, if it isn't consistent from year to year, you know, making determinations, say, about a walkable beach or how much, you know, it concerns me about what's already been decided based upon potentially insufficient analysis. I mean, it's something.
Well, I think that's, I know, I
I'm struggling with how we.
I think that's a concern with any project of this nature is, you know, you're always looking to improve and refine the data that you're collecting and how you're using it. I mean, I think even with corrections that may be made from this is even 2 or 3 years down the road, we're gonna say, well, we need to improve this because of these. I feel like you're always chasing better with data collection and process like this, especially as technology changes. I mean, even 10 years ago, no one was using LiDAR or anything like that for projects like this. So it's moving very quickly. So I think having that information and getting that dialogue with all the information will be important.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that it's technical things we're talking about here, and that, you know, as a certified drone pilot, I have the expertise, so I'm happy to share what we need with Jeff, who can get it out to the commission.
Unarmed ones, right?
Yeah, not in civil.
So far.
But yeah, I just think that hopefully, as we go forward with the monitoring of this project, we get better data coming in, because they even though they did do an analysis of their photogrammetry versus their LiDAR versus the Woods Hole ground survey to see how well those data points matched up, they said there was a high level of correlatedness to them, but we need directly comparable results. We need data taken in the exact same format year after year to really have good scientific evidence that this is what is happening that they say is happening. So I'll work with you.
Thank you for noticing those details that I am blind to.
That's why they're separate.
Yes.
Got their own little niche.
So then we have, unless there's any questions to Seth.
Yeah, or from the public potentially.
Yeah, great, thank you for doing that.
So we're gonna move on to the amendment to enforcement order to include condition number 28.
So from our last discussion at the last hearing, and actually I apologize that you weren't here for it, so.
I saw it though,
Okay.
in all its glory on my computer screen.
So I won't try to catch up too much. Is you guys had requested that we speak to council about how best to package up, including or dealing with condition 28 for the misreporting in the spring of 2019 with regards to the bathymetric and underwater survey that was missed, that SPPF documented back to us that was missed. And after speaking with George, I think George felt that it was the same time period where the quarterly survey was missed and those monitoring components were missed in that same time window, that amending the existing enforcement to include that condition as part of the original monitoring one was the appropriate course of action to take. And we talked about it for a bit, and one of the things that I think we wanted to make clear, and George wanted to make clear, is when you issue out enforcements, enforcements can be, because it's a question we occasionally get, enforcements can be for multiple conditions at the same time. They don't have to be issue enforcement for condition 1, condition 2. And then when he reviewed the facts here, I think he felt that for the same time window in the discussion that was there, and maybe some misunderstanding from our end on what was missed when we issued the first one, that it was a better fit with that original enforcement related to the missed spring monitoring of 2019. Does that make sense to everyone?
But I do have a question, which is, they still have met 2 failure criteria.
So yes and no. This is kind of a complicated answer, but
Well, let me just say from my point of view as a member of the commission, I feel that they have clearly had 2 failure criteria. One for the fill and the lack of reporting on that, and the 2 for the bathymetrics. And so I don't see how you could say that could all be lumped into a sort of a singular episode.
No, there are separate. There's still 2 enforcements, right? So the first enforcement is related to the missed monitoring, right?
Right.
And that's the one that George is recommending. The second enforcement that was issued was related specifically to the fill.
Right.
So those 2 are in existence, and he's recommending to amend the first one to incorporate all of it. It doesn't change the number of failure criteria they necessarily may or may not have hit. The commission found that they did meet the failure criteria for failure to meet their reporting requirements. The clean fill is of missing a standard condition in the order, and while it's required by the order and to do, is included. It's not necessarily, you would lump it in with the failure criteria related to the placement of the nourishment material. So that one was with the other one. So they've had the 2 failure criteria that we've met. That's what you guys have documented. It's the most confusing thing that's ever happened. That makes no sense to me.
Well, yeah, I'm puzzled because you do write, given that this applicant has met one of these failure criteria on the existing project. And I feel they've clearly, I don't see how you could, it gives the wrong impression to me reading it.
The order to make sure that I speak correctly.
So do we actually have the power to amend
Yes.
enforcement orders?
That's what I confirm back to George.
Yeah, I think Jeff's just looking
So
something
I just
up,
want to
so,
answer this
yeah.
question about the failure criteria because it's something that continues to come up. I just want to make sure that I do not misspeak because I have the ability to access it correctly.
Dave, what did you just say?
So we have to approve it and then vote on it if
Yeah.
we're gonna amend it.
So the failure criteria specifically listed in condition 34 of the order and the amended order both is there's the failure to provide the sand mitigation as required herein. Then there is the failure to conduct the shoreline monitoring and post-storm monitoring as required. Failure to repair or replace damaged geotextile tubes, excessive loss, updrift or downdrift, failure to maintain adequate beach width in front of the bank, and then the failure to maintain a walkable beach, and then failure to maintain all required insurance permits and licenses, and then the failure to meet reporting requirements or good faith effort to provide required reporting together. So when we found before, we covered in the enforcement that they had failed to conduct the shoreline monitoring and had a brief discussion about the reporting requirements. As far as the sand mitigation, we had held off on issuing that out pending the results of the testing that had come in. Because I think the concern of the commission at the time was quantifying that failure correctly. Just to replay that discussion in my head was, they clearly were meeting that in the sense they did not provide clean fill based on the standard condition 7. but I think there was some thought of if that fill was also contaminated with biological or chemical contaminants, that is a more, I hate to use the word extreme, but a more extreme failure of that condition. Having, yes, egregious is a better word than there. And I think the commission was still reserving the right to issue that out specifically once all the results were in. So that hasn't been found yet, but I would anticipate that once that testing is back that it will be. So right now we have found that they have met one definitively, have enforcements out on a second condition, and then pending the results of the test, that billing will be issued to what level appropriate for the level of failure to meet the sand mitigation is required. Hopefully that's a little bit better of an explanation.
Well, I guess it's how specific we want to be. You know, in other words, do we want to list, you know, A, and for failure to provide sand mitigation is required because they have failed.
Yeah, but for this,
But, you know,
we're just talking about adding to the other enforcement.
right.
So,
Yeah, to stay focused on just this.
The question is, are we gonna amend the other enforcement, or are we gonna issue a separate enforcement?
I mean, if town council said that amending the other enforcement is appropriate in this case, I would tend to agree with town council.
I would follow his lead.
Right.
So do we just need a motion then to amend?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Jeff?
No.
All right, so, is there a motion to issue an amended order of enforcement to include condition number 28?
Motion issued.
Sarah, a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously.
Otherwise, kind of moving to move on to the next agenda item.
Yeah.
3115.
Yes.
Wait, can we talk about the 2020 Shoreline Contract right now?
Sure.
I briefly mentioned it, but in the 2020 Shoreline Contract that they submitted, it seems to me like Woods Hole Group is proposing, instead of having the 4 typical ground-based surveys, they want to do 3 ground-based surveys and 1 aerial survey. And I personally think that is not acceptable considering the data we've gotten from the aerial surveys so far. And especially if the data is not relatable between what's being collected in the ground surveys and what's being collected in the aerial surveys, I think we should require them to do 4 ground-based surveys, and then if they choose to do an aerial survey, also do an aerial survey. But we shouldn't allow them to do 3 ground-based surveys and 1 aerial survey in place with the 4th quarterly survey.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to get any argument from me.
No, I mean, I think consistency is important. Looks like we have a question from the public.
Okay, so this relates both to that the 80th report, as well as the 2020 Woods Hole Group proposal for quarterly monitoring. The proposal states for quarterly, RJ Turcotte, Nantucket Land Council. So the proposal states for quarterly topographic beach profile monitoring, the survey will extend to the water line. The slope of the beach profile will be extrapolated to -5 feet below the mean water line. Mean low water, using methodologies described in the 2002 baseline trends and 2016 supplemental analysis technical memorandums. So SVPF has tried to get this monitoring condition changed in the past, and it's never been approved. And I actually took down a quote from Greg Berman in 2017. One of the main reasons to include wading shots in the beach profile, besides to tie into the bathymetry, is to include the potential sandbars, which can hold a significant volume of sediment, especially in winter, post-bluff erosion. Without examining individual beach profiles, not included in the Woods Hole Group report, one cannot determine the value of profiling below mean low water. While profiling to -5 feet mean low water can be logistically difficult, the request to completely eliminate wading shots might not be necessary, and he goes on to recommend doing whatever you can on the good weather days, going out to 2 feet or 3 feet below mean low water, rather than extrapolating every single time, which could really affect nourishment volume. If there is a sandbar out there, he goes on to talk about how it could change mitigation volume from 5 to 8% going forward. So the 78th, 79th, and 80th monitoring reports indicate that they've been extrapolating and not collecting proper data, accurate enough data for this project. And to go one step further, both the permit from 2015 and the amended one in 2018, so SU 48, 2824, and the newest one for the extended project 3115 require this quarterly survey be done as accurately as possible, and they're just not doing that. And it's sort of just, this is all snowballing from what Seth was just talking about with the aerial survey, and there being these little issues with that, and we're just not getting an accurate picture of what is actually going on and whether this is working. So I just thought it was important to bring that up to you.
Thank you. Jeff, is it possible to either bring the applicant in to discuss these, because I think it is important,
Absolutely,
yeah, for them to give us some true answers here. Yikes. Any other thoughts from the commission on that, or questions, comments from the public? Okay. Yeah, I think consistency and data that is readable to everybody is incredibly important. Yeah. And yeah, and if for some reason they do need to extrapolate on one of their surveys, then we should have a why. You know, well, we came out and it was bad weather for 4 weeks on end and we just couldn't do it. Like, there should be some explanation there, I would think.
Yeah, I felt like we heard that one time.
Right. Well, they did say it was dangerous, like they complained about doing it, but I never remember them.
I just remember the report, they said it was dangerous, so they didn't
Right.
do it, so but I didn't realize it became a practice.
Right.
It was not.
Well, we could probably arrange for Mitch to be present too. The list holder. So.
Yeah, agreed.
And I'll just give one more reason behind my analysis for having the 4 ground-based surveys, is that when you do aerial survey, especially a LiDAR survey, in the water environment, especially in a coastal environment, the breaking waves really mess up the volumetric calculation in the LiDAR. So extrapolating between 0 and -5 mean low water from an aerial survey is way worse than from a ground-based survey. So we definitely don't want them to extrapolate that 0 to -5 mean low water from the aerial survey.
Thank
They
you.
also dropped the math on it. Remember that just sort of petered out.
Yeah.
There are a number of things that have been petering out.
Well, I just want what we're getting to be valuable and
Right.
not to have to question the validity of the data, you know, because that's another major concern if what we're getting back is just not accurate or somewhat fudged. All right, so that'll be a future conversation.
Just keep carrying it.
Okay, so with that, we're gonna move on to discussion of SE 48 3115, the DEP superseding order of conditions. I do just want to remind commission members that we should not be discussing things we've discussed in executive session. Yeah, at this point.
So we put it on there because we also wanted to make sure that the public was aware that that superseding order was issued at the end of January on the 28th, and the appeal window for that to the state is February 11th, and that's something that you guys have been actively reviewing and discussing in posted executive sessions. And those discussions are still ongoing, and that's still active. But just to make the public aware that that was going on, and that is an available document on the town website with the superseding order. If you can't find it, feel free to email our office. We're happy to provide it to anyone at this point.
Yeah.
That's why we wanted to put it out there, because we wanted at least, we hadn't had an open session since it was issued. So it was issued last week. So just to make sure that everyone understood that it was out and available for the reviews.
Are there any general questions from the public about that?
Thank you for putting this on the agenda for open session. Could you just
Can you
tell
just state your name?
Oh, Deanne Atherton, Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. Could you just tell us what the process is? If you are contemplating taking action, do you do that in closed session and then come into open session and take a vote? How will we know if any action is taken?
Good question. So the commission will have those discussions as part of executive session. Any decision that they make, they'll then have to announce publicly as part of a regularly posted open session.
Okay, so an announcement will be made.
So if the commission chooses to appeal, they'll have to announce that as part of open session at some point. And if they choose not to appeal, they'll probably announce that as well.
Okay, it's just knowing if you're going to take any action has a bearing on other entities in the community for taking action. So it's now February 5th, right? So if the window is February 11th, you won't be having another meeting by February 11th? Is that right?
Our next scheduled meeting is
the 19th.
February 19th.
Yeah.
February 19th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I see your point. In other words, you're
Just
saying
see,
we
we
want
want-
to know if we've made a decision to appeal or not in
Right.
executive session.
And then other concerned entities in the community, if you, depending on what you decide to do, then there's kind of a decision tree. What do other entities do? And that's, so how do we, maybe we can call the office on February 11th or something. I just don't know how this works. I'm trying to recall in the past.
Because we're still in the middle of,
Yeah.
I mean, we're,
Right, I'm not pressing.
we have legal issues
No,
that are
so
in
just,
discussion.
I think I can try to answer it. So
Yeah.
I think the discussions
Yeah,
of
but
the
then they gotta
commissions and the review, there are always with any superseding order of conditions, questions about the specifics in the order and conditions and how they operate and things that happen. And I know the commission has specifically asked us to look at a few of those items and provide them some additional information to kind of fuel that decision. And that's something that we've been actively engaged in doing, and we'll definitely have all of that done for a final decision from the board prior to the 11th.
Prior to the 11th.
Yep, and as soon as, obviously, if the commission chooses to file an appeal with DEP, obviously when that gets sent in, that becomes public record, so that will certainly be available for people to review as well. So if that happens even in advance of the next open session, that's a document that becomes public. Because to meet the process, you have to file, there's a set form that is on the SOC that you can see you fill in, but then you also have to provide some technical reasoning why you feel like you want to appeal, other than we didn't go on appeal to appeal. So.
All right, thank you. Maybe the one other point that I just might like to share with you is there seemed to be a glaring error in the superseding order right on the front page, on the first sentence in the second paragraph. where it said the notice of intent was filed jointly by the Sponsored Beach Preservation Fund and the town. And it was not filed jointly. It was filed by SBPF. And I'm not asking you to respond to that, just pointing it out, because it would just seem to us that if the department thought this was a joint application with the municipality, it could affect their considerations and played a part in their decision. So it's just sort of to the public, the non-experts, it's just a glaring error. It's understandable because the first NOI was a joint application. And maybe there's some confusion there. Maybe it's just the way they stated it and they didn't consider it a joint application. But we just wanted to point that out to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the time you've given to this.
Burton Balkine. I would just encourage the board to appeal the decision, just based upon the track record. A lot of what we've pointed out in your meeting today about all the factual and errors that they've done in reporting and also their transgressions as far as the order of conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts from the public? Okay. Somehow we put this away. All right, so then we're moving on to reports.
I'm gonna tag out the Joanne's. I have to go give a presentation downstairs.
Good luck.
Okay, Jeff, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, reports, crack.
Nothing further to report from our last meeting, but the Civic League is having a coastal resiliency presentation this coming Saturday, February the 8th, between 1 and 3 downstairs. And Jen Carberg is going to be talking, and Sarah Boyce, and some other as well. So if you want to attend.
What's the time?
Oh, between 1 and 3 on Saturday, February 8th.
Will you think that will be filmed? Because I have to be up island. I'm just curious. Do you know?
That's a good. I would hope so.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
downstairs.
I can look into it.
Oh,
He knows.
have an answer.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Then we don't.
Okay.
Good.
We'll be
There we go.
Any good drinks there?
Is the
$50 more.
is the long-awaited report? Has it shown up?
Yes.
Is it available for the public yet?
I assume so. It's on the website, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it's on the website?
No, it's not available on the website yet. I've been trying to get it on there. These things sometimes take time. As soon as it is, what I promised is to send it around to everyone in there that is interested in send a link.
I'd like a copy.
Yeah, I think all of us would
We
like
would
it.
like, as a board.
Sure.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, I can send it out to you tomorrow.
Oh.
Through Jeff, because I've got a copy through Vince.
Oh, yeah,
Oh.
send it out
So
to
yeah,
Jeff.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Ian, that would be wonderful. I'd
Sure.
be very interested in seeing it.
All right, CPC.
We have nothing to report.
All right, NP and EDC.
Our last meeting, we discussed the various articles for town warrants for town meeting, focusing on zoning articles, biking articles, and height limitations.
Awesome. All right, commissioners' comments. You know, we've seen a lot of each other lately. They're all out. Administrator staff reports. Perfection. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Quickly as possible.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, boy.
Good one, Andrew.
I'm tired.
I'm like, wow.
Good job, Joe.
That Joe
Now I
is
have
killing it.
the existential question.